Good morning. My name is Rafael Alarcón, and I'm a professor here at Colegio, at el Colegio de la Frontera Norte. We want to welcome all of you coming all the way from Los Angeles, and also we apologize for the delay in starting this seminar, but we have some technical difficulties. But so we are here for the seminar. As you can see, the seminar will be conducted in English, even though for some of us that will be Spanglish, but we're going to try to do our best. So we're going to be working the whole morning with 5 presentations, and each presentation will take probably 20 minutes, and then we will leave 10 minutes for questions, comments. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of Father Pat Murphy, the director from Casa del Migrante, and some volunteers who are also attending this seminar. Also some professors here from El Colef, some of my colleagues, and I also thank you for your presence here, some students. And I want to introduce Professor Roger Waldinger, who is a sociology professor at UCLA. And I would like you to please explain a little bit the seminar that you are conducting at UCLA during the summer.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you, Rafael, and thanks to all of the colleagues at COLEF who have arranged for the seminar and have so generously agreed to participate this morning. So this is really, I just want to say one word of a kind of preface, which is this is part of an ongoing cooperative activity that the UCLA program on migration has undertaken with COLEF, and we, about a year and a half ago, we held a conference at UCLA, and so this is in a way a follow-up to that event, and I hope that this will be part of a continuing series of interchanges between students and colleagues at UCLA and students and colleagues at COLEF, and I think this has been a very productive and stimulating set of interactions. In any case, this event is a part of a summer seminar for college professors that is funded by a U.S. agency, U.S. federal agency, the National Endowment for Humanities, which funds during the summer a series of seminars and institutes, both for college professors nationwide as well as for teachers in primary and secondary schools. And the seminars cover a wide range of areas: arts, literature, history. Every so often, there is a seminar that is in the social sciences, the humanistic end of the social sciences, and this is one of those. I have conducted 3 NEH seminars, one in the early 1990s and then another one in 2011. And so the seminar brings together faculty and 2 graduate students from a broad range of disciplines. So we are sociologists, historians, political scientists, film scholar, literature scholar, anthropologists, scholars from ethnic studies, and so all interested in migration. So we have been meeting 3 days a week. This is the 4th week of the seminar. Part of the time is spent in discussion of readings that we all go through and explore together, and then about a third of our sessions are spent in workshops in which we read and then discuss one another's work. So we're delighted to have this opportunity to come to COLEF and to hear from the colleagues who work and do research here. And thanks so much to Rafael for arranging for the seminar.
Thank you very much, Roger. So we're going to start with the presentations. As I said before, all of the presenters are a professor at COLEF. So it's a UCLA seminar, but the presenters would be from COLEF because we want to offer the perspective from the border. So let's start with, so Eunice, please. Okay, so the first presentation is titled Switching Schools, School Attendance and Age Grade Gaps of Recent Migrant Children from the United States to Mexico. And this is Professor Eunice Vargas Valle, who is a researcher at the Population Studies Department. So, and as I mentioned before, you will have 20 minutes, and then we'll have like around 10 minutes for discussion. Okay. Thanks, Eunice.
Thank you, Rafael and Roger, for inviting me to present my work at this event. It's a pleasure for me to do this. And I want to say that Elizabeth Camacho, a former student of COLEF, also helped me with this presentation. Okay, the goals of the study are first, let me see here. The first goal is to analyze the associations of children's migration from the US to Mexico, that is from in the other direction, with school enrollment and age grade gaps based on the 2010 census microdata. The second goal is to analyze how social, human capital, and economic capitals available at home may mediate these associations. And third, to identify possible differences in these associations according to the urban composition of the recipient locality and the children's country of birth. In the last decade, Mexican population censuses showed an increase in return migrants and children born in the US. However, there were few sociodemographic studies that explored the school enrollment of return migrants or of those that were born in the US and recently migrated to Mexico with their parents and relatives. We have anthropological studies that show that transnational students face administrative and cultural barriers in their integration to Mexican schools, which has a negative impact on their educational trajectories. For instance, until June 2015, that is last month, a school asked parents for the apostille, that is like something that is issued by the State Departments in the US, and on birth certificates and school documents to enter Mexican schools, and many migrants didn't know that. So they came back from the US with that requirement, and it was really very difficult for children to enter school and continue their education in Mexico, especially if their parents were deportees. Okay, about the theoretical perspective, that's always a question. Which theoretical perspectives are used to study these children? Because you have many theories in the US to study schooling of Mexican children that arrive to the US and their trajectories there, like the assimilation theories, transnationalism, the oppositional theory, optimism of the second generation. These are some of them. But in the opposite direction, we have not developed theories about that. And what we do mostly is or not using any theory or to adapt some theories that you have developed. And for instance, Zúñiga used the transnationalism but from below, and Medina used segmented assimilation. In this work, we used some ideas of the assimilation theory, but we couldn't use it as a whole or entirely because our data is cross-sectional and we don't have all the variables that we'd like to use to fully take into account all the elements of the theory. However, this theory says that assimilation may take different trajectories because it depends on the context in which settlement occurs. And the decisions of immigrants in favor of their children are constrained by institutional environments. And also, it says that the decisions are influenced by the forms of capital available to immigrants: social, economic, human, cultural, and community capitals. So we use these ideas and for the study. Though we assume then that enrollment in time and age grade gaps of immigrants will vary according to the institutional context that we measured by the urbanization level. It's not the perfect variable to measure this, but is associated with the supply of education in rural areas. We have a lower supply of education, and also aspirations and beliefs about education are different in those settings compared to the urban areas or the high, like Tijuana, like it's a huge city. We have a different perception of education than in a community where people is just in the fields. So we use that variable as this to measure this. Also, we assume that the association of immigration and education will be mediated by the forms of capital. And finally, we assume that immigrant children born in the U.S. will show lower educational disadvantages with respect to immigrant children born in Mexico because of children's migratory trajectories. They maybe had lower movements between one country and another, and also fewer transitions from one school to another, and also because of aspirations. Parental and children's educational aspirations may be different if they were born there or in the U.S. or if they were born in Mexico. Okay, our methodology. We use as I told you, we use the sample of the Mexican census. We use only a sample of children, 11 to 15-year-olds, because we wanted children that had experience, school experience in the U.S. So and the variable to measure the migration from the U.S. is it's about the residence of five years ago. So we needed that period to know if they were at the U.S. in that range. And we use descriptive statistics and multinomial logistic regression models. The dependent variable is not enrolled at school, enrolled with an age grade gap, that is if they had one or more year of delay at school, and enroll at the right grade. That sometimes I say like enroll on time. It's not that they go on time at school, but it's that they are at the right grade. Okay, and the explanatory variable is recent immigration from the U.S. according to their residence 5 years ago. Okay, and what about the dependent variables? We include in the model sex, age, country of birth, indigenous language. At the household level, there we have the measures of the capitals. Years of schooling of the head of the household was used as a measure of human cultural capital at home. Household structure combined with parental co-residence was an indicator of social capital, and the number of assets was a proxy of economic capital. And at the community level, we had the level of urbanization and the migratory region. Okay, this is a map of Mexico. And what we see here is that most immigrant children are concentrated in the north and the west. and the West is the traditional sending region of migrants to the US. And what we did was, is just, as you see, there are many municipalities, like, I think for a lot, like half of the municipalities don't have children that immigrated from the US. So we dropped those municipalities because it's not the context where children are arriving. They are municipalities that are not receiving children from the US, and we use only the rest of the municipalities. Okay, let's see. This is the percentage of 11 to 15-year-olds that are not enrolled at school by migration from the US and level of urbanization. We see here that those that migrated from the US show higher educational disadvantages than those that did not migrate. But that's at the total, at the national level. But the gap is not that big. It's just 2% between them. But as if we see how that changes with the level of urbanization, we see that the gap increases, and that in highly urban places, that is the last. That are the last two columns. We see that the gap is like 4% between immigrant children and non-immigrant children, and the same happens with the age grade gaps. Here, as we can see, schooling opportunities in Mexico are unequal and are linked to urbanization. Actually, immigrants show advantages in rural areas, but disadvantages in urban settings. Okay. The socioeconomic profiles of immigrant children from the US are these: like 42% of immigrants were born in the US versus less than 1% of non-immigrants. Immigrants live more with one of their parents in nuclear or extended households than non-immigrants. Among immigrants, the heads of the household are more likely to have between 7 and 11 years of schooling, that is at the middle of the distribution, than among non-immigrants. Non-immigrants have parents that are not, they have like primary school or university, that they are more likely to be in the extremes. But immigrants, no, and that's logical. If we think in the profiles of migrants that are at the middle of the distribution, are not the poorest of the poor. So immigrants are more likely to have a higher average of assets in the household, and also tend to live more in rural areas and middle cities. Okay, the model. Ooh, many numbers. Here we have the blue ones, which of all the blue ones, and then the purple ones. And this model says that there is a positive association between recent immigration from the US and not being enrolled at school and age grade gaps of children. Since the risk ratios decline when we introduce social capital and context variables, that's the model B, we can say that these variables explain part of the immigrant disadvantage. Social capital and context variables explain part of that disadvantage in both indicators, age grade gaps and enrollment. However, when we introduce the economic and cultural capital variables, this ratio increases in both educational outcomes, which means that these capitals protect the educational outcomes of immigrants. Immigrant children will have higher risks of not being at school or having delays if they live in the economic and cultural conditions of Mexican children. This means that they are in a better economic condition and cultural condition, immigrants. And if they were like Mexicans, their risk will be higher of not being at school or having delays. Okay, we did also interactions with the level of urbanization and with the country of birth. And here, the descriptive statistics were confirmed. The educational differences between immigrants and non-immigrants are greater in highly urban areas. However, when controlling for other variables, there are educational disadvantages of immigrant children in rural places too. And we saw advantages of immigrant children in the descriptive analysis because we didn't take into account their economic profiles and cultural profiles. Once we take that into account, we see that the disadvantages of being an immigrant are applied to rural areas and urban areas too. Okay, what about the country of birth of children? Here, we can see that being born in the US diminishes the risk of not going to school in both immigrants and non-immigrants, and also reduces the risk of being delayed at school among immigrants. That means that being born in the US decreases the educational risks of immigrants, but it does not eliminate them. I mean, it's a protection for them to have been born in the U.S. Is a positive thing for them, and could be associated with that with fewer movements of schools, fewer migrations, and educational greater educational aspirations. But it does not eliminate their risk or disadvantages. I mean, all immigrants are disadvantaged, no matter where they live, where they were born. Okay, my conclusions. Recent immigrants from the US exhibit higher risks of not being enrolled in age rate gaps than non-immigrant children, after taking into account human, cultural, social, and economic capitals, I'm sorry for the why, as well as the urban context of the place of settlement. And the lack of social capital in the community context of immigrant children increased their risk of not being enrolled and being delayed at school. However, their higher economic and human cultural capitals protect them from higher educational risks. Okay, the disadvantages of recent immigrants from the US are greater in highly urban areas with respect to non-immigrants. Why? One is because Mexican children show better educational indicators, of course, in highly urban areas. But this is not the only reason, because we saw the interactions there that it goes down as the level, the comparison group is better as with higher in places, more urban places, but also the immigrants go worse at each that's the idea. It might be that in highly urban settings the registration and enrollment process is more complex. Also in observed characteristics like more deportees probably in highly urban settings, less social capital at the community level, or possibly more segregation. But because we have studied Tijuana as our city, and most of these kind of children are in the peripheries, are not at the center of the cities. So also I think we should do more work on segregation. What is going on with migrants? Where are located in our cities? They are in cities, but where? And also, and they are not returning to the place where they left. They are returning to other places. Okay, other thing, the other conclusion, the educational disadvantages of immigrants, especially in age grade gaps, are lower among children that were born in the US compared to those born in Mexico. Why? as I told you, fewer migrations, fewer change between educational systems. But also, I think that something cultural that we cannot see with numbers is going on there. That is the higher educational aspirations of parents and also of children. Because many children, when you interview them, they want to go back to the US. And they want to go back because they want to get the papers for their parents. And they want to study university grade at the university level. So I think it's not only that they are moving, they have fewer movements, but also there is something else. Like, remember that these are the second generation of immigrants. They were the second generation of immigrants in the US, and now they are back. Okay. Good news, because on June 15, this last month, Mexican Education Ministry canceled the apostille requirement on the documents of immigrant children. This news needs to spread out because many schools don't know this. And before, the requirement was for graduating, not for enrolling, and the schools didn't know this. And children couldn't enter to schools. So I think this is big news, because this risk that I showed you could probably in 5 years will not be that way. I mean, will be eliminated with this action of the Mexican government, but we don't know, because still immigrants may need help in their adaptation to Mexican schools in order to prevent dropouts or age grade gaps. There are also youth or youngsters that drop out after they could enter the school and be there, but they don't speak Spanish, and they cannot adapt to the new context. While you have many programs in the U.S. to favor the adaptation, the integration of Mexican children, and in the schools, we don't have these kind of programs. That there is a program, but it doesn't work in each school as you do in the U.S. So, because they may be facing sociocultural barriers and negative consequences of their social and community capitals too. It's not it's the school, but also the context where they live. So those were my conclusions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Eunice. Wait. We still have, well, you can go there if you want. We have like around 9-10 minutes for questions, comments about this very interesting project. No, let's do it now. Sorry. No, fine. Rodolfo, of course. Thank you.
This information, these results, is very provocative in order to see what kind of policies for this kind of problem we have since the last 10 years, or with many people coming back from U.S. And many of these people they are U.S. citizens. They are children. And they, as you mentioned, they need some kind of help for adaptation. Not just that's good that the apostille requirement is already, but the major problem, it seems that they don't have any kind of help in the cultural adaptation in the communities. But it seems the problem is worse, because many of them, they are not back to the rural community where the families were. Mm-hmm. Now they are coming to the cities, and this is a big problem. So let me ask you a little question. What kind of policies the Mexican needs for help these people?
I think this is not an easy question. It's not an easy answer, because Because we'll need something like the programs that you have, that U.S. citizens have in the U.S. in each school, because there is a program like that is Provem that is not in each school, but it organizes like workshops with those children to give like psychological orientation and teach them Spanish, but it's not in all schools. It's like one in one of the areas. So I think we need also more studies, because we really don't know like the process of the integration of children. Like, when is the best time to attend them, I mean the temporality of the program should target the time when they are having trouble, not when they already adapt. Or so we need to know more this process of integration and what are the needs of those children before saying this is what you need. And because and I think we need more investment of government in the program that is already that they have, because it's not efficient. But I think it's more like probably in niche colonia, barrio, like the niche community.
Neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. Probably, I don't know if it's possible to have one, in each school a program, but probably in the neighborhood, and like to locate the neighborhoods that are receiving most of the children, and big cities, and have a program there for those students after school. I mean, I'm just saying things that I don't know well, because we need to understand better like that process that is not. There are not many studies in Mexico about that.
There is another question, Father Murphy.
Yeah, hi, Father Pat from the Casa Migrante. Thank you very much. This is a good start, but the bad news, it's worse than you painted it. Because not only do the kids don't speak English, but we see their parents don't speak Spanish, sorry. Their parents arrive at the Casa Migrante, don't speak Spanish as well. And the other aspect is we're going to have kids who aren't deported, but they're U.S. citizens coming home with mom and dad. So what will we offer them? I think the solution is very simple. Mexico needs to wake up. And the government is still sleeping. They think these deportees are going to go and blend in with some, thank you, blend in with some, go back to Michoacán, Pueblo de mi nacimiento, you know, the birthplace, and everything's going to be fine. But they really have to open their eyes and begin programs. So maybe studies like this have to happen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Yes.
Have you observed any?
The microphone, please. Thanks.
Have you observed any gender gaps, like better adaptation among girls than boys? And I was very interested about the model itself, and I was wondering if you have like somehow captured some school climate variables, or even some identification among the students. I know that you alluded to the idea of being identified as being a US-born citizen, but kind of the processes of self-identification. I mean, there are a lot of things that your study are super thought-provoking and everything, but in particular, the idea of gender gaps, if you might actually find more accentuate, more radical findings if you consider gender as a structure.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think boys adapt worse. Like they have more problems in their adaptation than girls, and we can see that in the data. But when I did the interaction, it was not significant. But probably it could be because we need more more cases. Or in the descriptive analysis, we can see that, like boys adapt, not have, like their capabilities for adaptation are lower than within girls. And the other question was about the other variables. Of course, the schools, this is really important, the school context, but we don't have in the census data on schools. That's why I didn't include that other variables, but we need data about schools, particular schools, what is going at the school level and at the community level, at the household level, and the individual's profile. So I think a survey based on schools will be really the best approach to do this, because we could take into account what is going on there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, Eunice again. Now we're going to continue with my presentation. And so we will continue talking about this recent return of many Mexicans from the United States to Mexico, and that includes both voluntary people who decided to return, probably because of the economic recession, because there were fewer jobs, but also, and more importantly, a lot of people who were deported. So that's not voluntary return, but forced return. So let's see, start with the presentation. No, this is not the MIF, the massive deportation. So the title of my presentation is The Massive Deportation of Mexican Migrants to Tijuana from the United States. And first, we're going to start analyzing a photograph. Oh, I have to do that, sorry for that. Let's take a look at this photograph in black and white, who was taken in Mexicali 2 weeks ago. It's, of course, about deportations, and it's very interesting to analyze what's going on in that situation. Again, it's in Mexicali, it's right on the border, and as you can see, the U.S. agents, the U.S. authorities are pushing out this Mexican migrant who refuses to leave the United States, whereas the Mexican agent, the immigration agent from Mexico, is trying to keep him in the U.S. Very interesting, don't you think? Well, the only thing is that this photograph was taken in 1954 during the so-called dry-out period in the history of Mexican migration to the United States. It was taken in Mexicali. And in that time, interesting, let me go back to the photograph. What is happening is that the Border Patrol agents are pulling in the migrant, and the Mexican police is trying to also pull in, the migrant into Mexico. So what happened during the dry out period? As opposed as today, in those years during the Bracero program, the United States, in its continuous debate with the Mexican government, decided to legalize undocumented migrants, and that's why that process was called the dry out, because the idea was to dry the so-called wetbacks. And they also needed to just literally step on Mexican soil in order to return as Braceros. So it's just very interesting to show the different attitudes that the U.S. government has implemented towards Mexican migration. In 1954, they wanted the Braceros. even though they went against the law. They didn't care. They wanted braceros. Now they want to push most of the Mexicans out of the United States. And then this is the story about deportations. This is actually a very interesting photograph that belongs to the UCLA library. So it's interesting. And don't forget the dry out process in the 1950s. Well, I will, as I said before, I'm going to continue talking about this return, very, very important return of Mexicans from the US. This is a very interesting graph from the Pew Research Center that sort of shows the history of Mexican migration to the United States. And as you can see, there was a very, very important growth that took place starting in the 1970s, all the way to the 2008. And as you can see here, this is the return. So a lot of Mexicans decided to return to Mexico because they, on their own will, but that also includes lots of deportees. So let's see the justification of this. Secretary Napolitano announces in 2010 that in fiscal year 2010, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I'm going to ask you to let me know 5 minutes before. Sorry. So in fiscal year 2010, ICE set a record for overall removals of illegal aliens with more than 392,000 removals nationwide. Half of those removed, more than 150,000 were convicted criminals. Very interesting. So as you can see, the head of the Department of Homeland Security is announcing to the nation that they are deporting almost 200,000 criminals from the United States. So this is great for the United States because, I mean, you want to get rid of criminals. And this is great. Actually, Secretary Napolitano is now the president of the UC system, right? Indeed. But the only problem with this argument is that it's not completely true. So most of the deportees are not criminals. And that we have to say that clearly. There are, of course, criminals, but not all of them. And I will try to argue this. Okay, there are two strategies to control aliens, as they are called in the US. That means people who were not born in the United States. Please, first in 1993, we saw the beginning of the enhanced border enforcement period with the construction of walls, the increase of the number of border patrol agents, etc. But in 2002, we see this new development of deportation from the interior of the United States. And of course, in Mexico, we know about deportations from the border. And we are accustomed to that, especially since 1924 when the Border Patrol was created. But in 2010, there was this new kind of, the increase of this new kind of deportation that is called removal. It's very important to keep in mind the concept, removal. And that's part of the US law, but starting in 2010, the number of removals has increased very rapidly. So let's see the definition. So removals are deportations based on an order of removal. An alien who is removed has administrative or criminal consequences for subsequent entries. So it's a very, very formal deportation. The other kind of deportation is the so-called returns that are not based on an order of removal. Most of the voluntary returns are of Mexican nationals who have been apprehended by the U.S. Border Patrol. So now the difference is that the number of removals has increased very dramatically in the last few years. And as you can see, and as you can imagine, that has a lot of consequences for the future of these people. But the most important thing is that most of the people who have been removed have families in the U.S., a very long stay in the U.S., and that is, of course, a huge, huge problem. We don't have time to go over the legislation that has made the deportation of non-citizens easier, starting in 1988 with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, then the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, the so-called 1996 IRERA, Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. And now a very, very interesting thing, the creation of aggravated felonies. Not only a felony, but aggravated. And that is a very, very important reason for deportation. Let me just show you, for instance, here, that now a DUI is an aggravated felony. So driving under the influence of alcohol or any other drug has become a felony, and therefore is a good reason for deportation. Also, domestic violence. Domestic violence is also another reason for deportation. Okay, these removals have been organized under very different programs. For instance, the 287G program. This is a very interesting program that allows local, state and local enforcement entities to enter into agreements with the federal government. So basically, the federal government trains local and officers to enforce immigration. Okay, so there's the 287G program. Then the Secure Communities program that was discontinued a few months ago, in November 2014, that is now, the name of the program is now Priority Enforcement Program. Very interesting definition, because the Secure Communities program was highly criticized because it did not focus on very, very dangerous people. It focused on people who committed misdemeanors, but they were deported anyways. So what they do is basically with this program is they go to prisons, state, local prisons, and they try to identify the people there, inmates there, who are undocumented. So ironically, when they are free to go, then ICE goes there and then takes them, processes them, and then deport them. So, of course, there are people who were in jail before they were deported. And Tijuana is receiving a lot of people who were in jail before. Father Murphy can tell us a lot about these people who are in Casa del Migrante. And then we also have the National Fugitive Operations Program, the Operation Community Shields, that focuses on criminal street gangs. So they basically focus on gangs. And then the Operation Streamline that focuses on first-time crossers that instead of being returned to Mexico are removed. So the idea is to really punish first-time crossers because they want to dissuade, dissuade people from coming. So Operation Streamline is usually is applied usually in Texas and I think Arizona. So as you can see, with these different programs, we have different types of deportees. We have people who were in jail, we have people who belong to gangs, and also first-time crossers. But also many, many other different kinds of people, like also dreamers, that means kids who were taken to the US with their parents, and then since they are undocumented, they are later deported. Let's see this interesting number. In 10 years, between 2003 and 2013, 9 or 10 years, 2.6 million Mexican immigrants have been removed from the United States. This is a lot of people. 2.6 million is more people than the population in Tijuana. I think it's probably the population of the city of Puebla. So the whole city of Puebla has been deported. It's a lot of people. And I think that we don't pay much attention to this. It's a huge, huge problem for Mexico. And let me show you the distribution of these so-called criminals who have been deported by country of nationality in 2013. Of course, we're going to have Mexico as the most important source of deportees because of the propinquity, it's a very nice word that I learned in the US, propinquity between the United States and Mexico, the long, long history of migration. But then let's pay attention to the most important, 8 most important countries of nationality of these deportees. It's Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil. What do you think? I don't see any Asian country, even though the population of Chinese immigrants is huge, as well as the population from Vietnam and India. So why is that? Is that the Latin American and immigrants from the Caribbean are the ones that are more likely to be criminals? I don't know the answer, but we need to study this. Why? I mean, I can understand Mexico, but then Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Central America. This is just a question that we can discuss later. The United States has identified 3 types of aliens that are a priority for arrest and detention. Level 1 includes people, really, really bad people who have committed murder, rape, robbery, kidnapping. Then level 2 basically includes people who have committed offenses against the property, like burglary, larceny, fraud, money laundering. And then level 3 is basically misdemeanors. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but even the Office of the Inspector General within the Department of Homeland Security has identified or has concluded that the 287G resources have not been focused on aliens who pose a greater risk to the public. Even the US government is saying that they are not deporting criminals. And this is a very interesting report from 2010. Let's focus a little bit on Tijuana. In 2010, Tijuana received 28% of all the deportees from the United States, but that includes removals and returns. In 2013, the numbers went down, but still Tijuana received 14%. So Tijuana is receiving a lot of deportees. And that creates a huge problem for of course, the deportees, their families, but also the people in border cities. Let me show you a very interesting graph from Casa del Migrante. And this is based on their questionnaire when they interview people who want to stay at Casa del Migrante. And this is very, very, very interesting. So here we distinguish between deportees and non-deportees. And as you can see, the number of deportees began to grow very rapidly starting in 2006 and then all the way to 2009 and then with a little bit of a decline in 2011. But we're talking about around 10,000 people per year that are housed at Casa del Migrante. So can you imagine it's a lot of people who need food, shelter, etc., information. So that shows that the role of Casa del Migrante has changed. Instead of serving migrants who wanted to go to the United States, now they are serving deportees. And we're going to visit Casa del Migrante right after lunch, and then we can continue our discussion there. We're going to continue. Let's talk a little bit about the different types of deportees. For instance, we have here Nancy Landa, a very bright girl from, who was deported from the United States. She was taken to the United States when she was 9 years old by her parents. They went to live to Los Angeles, to Long Beach. She went to school. She was a very good student, and she graduated. And then suddenly, when she turned 29 years old, the ICE went to her house and took them, and she was deported to Tijuana when she was 29 years old. So that's a very interesting example of a dreamer who was deported. Of course, she didn't have time for DACA. She was deported before DACA, so she's in Mexico now. Actually, since she cannot study in the U.S., she was able to get a fellowship from CONACYT to go and do a master's program in London. So the United States doesn't want her. Who cares? She went to England. Then we also have deported veterans in Tijuana. So people who went to war, who were soldiers in the United States, like for instance Fabián Rebolledo, Héctor Barajas, and Alex Murillo. They were also deported after they went to war. And we had this very interesting event here at COLEF with them, and they talked about their experiences as veterans who were deported. It's kind of difficult to sort of agree with them, because they said, oh, I went to war because I wanted freedom from the United States. And if the United States still wants me, I can go again. And we said, but they deported you. It doesn't matter. I want to fight for the United States. Then let me give you a very few cases, and I will end with this. Some of these interviews were conducted at Casa del Migrante and Casa Madre Asunta. For instance, the case of Raúl, who was deported after spending 25 years in prison for murder and drug trafficking. His life sentence was reduced. He was a legal permanent resident. Of course, the status was removed. And he has a daughter, a U.S. citizen. Of course, Raúl, he fits the definition of a criminal, probably. But Norma is a very, very sad case. Norma was deported because she didn't have a driver's license. She didn't have a criminal history. She was undocumented for 11 years in the US. And she has a son who was born in the US. It's a very sad story because the day when she was deported, she decided to take lunch to her husband. She went to the place where she worked, and she made a wrong turn, and she went into a complex that was kind of a secret place near Los Angeles, and the police approached her, and as a result of that, she was deported. So Norma is definitely not a criminal. And then we have Rosa. Well, Rosa was deported for drug possession. A guy asked Rosa, "Can you please keep these 40 kilograms of marijuana in your house?" And she said yes. She was undocumented for 10 years in the US. She's a single mother with 3 children, 2 US citizens. And as a result of that, their children are under the custody of social services. And now she's in Tijuana now, and she's trying to get her children back. But it's a very, very long and complicated process. Because, of course, she is a criminal. And then Roberto was a very interesting case also. Roberto was deported due to domestic violence, violence applied retroactively. Because he had spent 6 months in prison, and then he was also later approached by the ICE, and they said, "Oh, you committed domestic violence, you were involved in domestic violence, so we're going to deport you." But he said, "But wait, I spent 6 months in prison because of that." It doesn't matter. This is going to be applied retroactively, even though, and he is now in the US. He was a legal permanent resident, but the status was removed. Okay, so as you can see, it's now the status of legal permanent resident is very fragile. So unlike it was in the past. In the past, it was enough to have a legal permanent resident status. Now, the status can be removed very easily. That's why a very, very important reason for becoming U.S. citizens is to protect, to have a protection against deportation. But what about U.S. citizens? There is a very interesting case in this very, very important magazine, The New Yorker. And there's this interesting article titled "The Deportation Machine," in which the author describes the case of Mark Little, who was born in North Carolina. So he made some mistakes. He was in jail when a lady from ICE interviewed him. They wanted to make sure whether or not he was an undocumented person. He was born in North Carolina, but that lady thought that he was a Mexican illegal, even though he didn't speak Spanish at all. He spoke English with a southern accent, but they didn't believe him, and he was deported to Mexico. He was deported to this beautiful city, Reynosa, which is not city, it's a city, but not beautiful. And this U.S. citizen deported. And then guess what? The Mexican authorities thought that he was not Mexican. And then he was deported to Guatemala. So, read the article. Luckily, a lady from a U.S. embassy in Guatemala believed his story and helped Mark Little to return to the United States. He helped him get a passport and then return to the United States. So his brother, who was in the military, decided to wait for him at the airport in order to avoid any other mistake. And I suppose that he is finally in the U.S. So, very important for all of you citizens, you are not immune. Be careful, because sometimes the U.S. authorities make mistakes. And just the conclusion, 3 conclusions, is really removals is this the ultimate solution to the undocumented problem in the U.S.? So let's get rid of all of the undocumented from the U.S. Let's get rid of the 12 millions. So what I predict, and I can probably bet a lot of money, that in a few years there will be the generalization of Operation Streamline. In a few years, the first time undocumented crossers will be removed. I'm probably wrong, but well, I would like to know your opinion. But I think that will be generalized. I mentioned before, the legal permanent resident status is a very fragile immigration status now. And finally, the social and economic cost of removals are borne by families and the civil societies of border cities, because the Mexican government at the 3 different levels do not really participate. They have some programs without funding. So the real costs are I mean, the people from the border cities, but also their families, especially their families, are the ones that help the deportees. So thank you very much. So we don't have time for questions, so we will continue with this discussion at Casa del Migrante. So let's continue with the 3rd presentation, please. Okay, so we're going to have the final presentation, and then we will have a break, a coffee break. So this is going to be a very interesting presentation by Luis Calva Sánchez and Gabriel Sánchez González. They are going to talk about the survey that we organize here at Colegio. So the title of their presentation is Surveys on Migration at Mexico's Northern and Southern Border. So, please.
Good morning. First of all, we want to like to thank to Dr. Rafael Alarcón and Dr. Roger Waldinger for the invitation. It is for us a very great opportunity to spread the MIF survey to students and researchers who visit to Colegio today. We are going to speak about how we do the survey. We are going to explain the principal issues of the MIP survey, why it is the unique data source to measuring migration flows, which is the specific methodology, how we identify the migrants, and in the end, somewhat about the main results. for the northern and southern border represent a statistic observatory for this project. In these areas, we see many types of movements of humans from one region to another. In order to collect information regarding this displacement, we have two surveys. In the northern border, we have the EMIF Norte, that is carried out continuously since 1993. And in the southern border, we have EMIF Sur, that is carried on continuously since 2004. Today we speak more about EMIF Norte, which is directly concerned to USA-Mexican migration. The background. Our principal reference is Cañón Zapata project. It includes the first COLEF survey, sub-1 experimental, to measure the flows. There was already the hypothesis that the Hauser-Hawk survey wouldn't get the information needed to study mobility. Cañón Zapata used various methodologies, and photography was an important information source for this project. After that survey de Cañón Zapata, in 1993, CONAPO, la Secretaría del Trabajo y en COLEF designed a mobility survey at crossing point to study labor migration between Mexico and the United States. The objectives were estimation the labor migrant flows and total flows, collect data that include social demographic variables, employment status, and country of residence in the northern border. Migratory status, crossing documentation, remittances, previous experience, and health status. At this time, EMIF is the unique survey that gives information about Ontauros migrant and about the social and demographic characteristics of removed and returned migrants. In the project, the measuring of migration flow is not limited to study one direction. As migrants don't change permanently their place of residence, it's important to study different flows on different directions. Migration don't break the family and social ties to make them return regularly to their place of origin. In this context, EMIF North analyzed 4 different flows. We have in this map the 4 different flows. The first case, we have the flow from Mexico, south, and the people that we identify in this flow is Mexican-born individuals between 15 years of age or older, arriving at Mexican northern border region, and we have 2 types of migrants who reported that they installed at the northern border city, and the second is who reported that they intend to cross the U.S. and are not residents of Mexican border cities of the United States. The second case is the flow from the northern border. They are Mexican-born individuals, 15 years of age and older, living Mexican northern border region after a more than a month stay. The next flow is from USA. They are Mexican-born individual, 50 years of age or older, living Mexico northern border region, who reported working or making their home in the U.S. or visiting for more than a month for other purposes, such as visiting relatives. And the last flow is flow returned by the Border Patrol. They are migrants returned or removed by USA authorities. To approximate these flows, we have this coverage, geographical coverage. In the case of flow from south, the survey is conducted in 12 border cities as bus and train station, airport, ports of entry, highways, and migration meeting points. In the case of flow from north of Mexico, the survey is conducted at airports, bus stations, and in center for vehicle entrance in the Mexican border. EMIF also captures return flows from USA in 4 international airports in the interior of Mexico. It is Mexico City, Guadalajara, Morelia, and León. We interviewed migrants coming directly from the US to Mexico by plane, without going through the border. The next flow is removing or returning people. The survey is conducted at the ports of entry where border portal deliver removed people to the Mexican authorities. Now, quickly, this is the flows in the EMIF Sur. We have 8 flows.
Where in EMIF Sur, we interview the people that are deported from United States to Guatemala and Honduras and Salvador, and also the people are deported from Mexico, like the case that Rafael was telling us. The Mexican authorities returned to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras too, and also the voluntary flows that people that is coming to Mexico is trying to reach the United States, and the people that voluntarily are returned. So that's the flows that we capture in the EMIF Sur.
I'm going to continue with methodology. The methodological design of the EMIF is based on application of a probability sampling approach of mobile population. The measurements are based in continuous and prolonged observation of the migration flows at the northern border. It's important to note the relationship between the displacement and the individual, that is to say, between migration and migrants. EMIF survey captured the movement and from this recovered the social, demographic, economic, and migration experience. EMIF methodology and sample design are constructed by distinguish 2 dimensions of migrant journey, the time and the space. Any survey needs an able and good sampling frame. The first sampling frame was built in 1992 to identify places where the flow is concentrated, like bus station, airport, as well as their distribution along the time, weekday and hours. The frame was rising in 20 localities along the border south-north migratory flow. The result was the 10 localities concentrate the majority of the migration flows. That's all.
Yeah. I'm going to continue. Thank you very much and good morning. As Luis has said, the data collection are conducted regularly for each quarter of a year, and I think the main strength of this data source is that we have been collecting the data since 1993, so we can, as we are going to see in some of the main results, we can see a very long time periods and how is the as you see also, we are in bus stations, airports, port of entry, highways, and migrant meeting points, like Altar. Altar is not a border city, but is a very particular town that is where a lot of migrants meet, and then they cross in El Sázabe, that is in the desert of Sonora. And this is some of the. This is one example of the questions that or people with field work, how we identify the migrants. So someone that is coming to Tijuana, we ask them these questions, and then we identified that they are migrants. So then we started to asking a lot of questions. Depends of the particular characteristics of the person. And we also want to share that we, since 2013, we started to collect the data instead of doing in paper. We are doing the service, helping us with the app in a tablet. So the information is going very fluidly, and also we can have the results more quickly. And this is the kind of screens that the people that are taking the survey can touch the screen, that the gender, the age, and then the filter, and then we identify that is a migrant, and the main purpose of visiting the town. And this is, I'm in charge of the field work of this project. That's why I'm here, and this is the dimension of the two projects. We have EMIF Norte, like Luis had said, and EMIF Sur. To give some idea of the operation, is in each quarter of a year in EMIF Norte we have 1,000 as you see, and 198 shifts. That there is a couple of people, one that is serving, and the other person is counting how many people is crossing the places where we are observing, and the dimension of how many questionnaires we reached in 2004. In the last quarter, we reached 9,088 questionnaires. That means the migrants. And also in EMIF Sur, we have each quarter like 553 shifts, and the questionnaires that we have in the last quarter of 2014 was 10,051 questionnaires. That means migrants too. So I want to in this point, I want to invite you to visit the website, and you can you can download the databases, and you can obtain graphics with the data like this. Here we can see some of the results, as we can see from 2003 to 2014 is how has been changing the migrant flow. In the green line, we can see migrant flow from the USA to Mexico. So that's the voluntary persons that are coming back to Mexico. So we can see there is in 2009, after 2009, there is a clear drop. I think maybe we can guess maybe because of the economic crisis in the United States, and also the red line, we can see the returned migrant that we have been talking about, and how is changing across the time. In this chapter, this graphic, we can see these are the deportees, and no, there's the people that flow to the United States, but we are in some of the questionnaire, we ask them if they have papers, if they have documents. So we can see across the time how it's changing the percentage of people that have documents and is trying to reach the United States, and it's very clear that. And this is very interesting because this graphic shows us how much time they spent in the United States before they had been deported, and we can see in 2011 the people that are more than 1 year is very significant. It's 46%. And there's another example that the data that we can manipulate the database and can have this information. So we want to invite you that you can enter the website and see the quarterly indicators, annual newsletters, annual publication, and also the databases. And I invite you to visit and download the database, and you can have a lot of information and very good source for your studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis and Gabriel, for this presentation about the survey that, as they mentioned, you can use the data if you want to do some research on migration flows between Mexico and the United States. I think that we're going to take a break now, and we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we're going to continue with two very, very interesting presentations about religion, and also about the cultural activities that indigenous people organize in the United States. So let's take 15 minutes. Thank you. The first presentation is titled Believe and Migrate, a methodological proposal for analyzing the migratory experience and religious change from localities of origin. And the professor is a good friend of mine, Professor Olga Ogers, who is a professor at the Department of Social Studies here at Colegio. And she will have 20 minutes. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you. I will try to...
We didn't have questions.
I will try to say everything in 20 minutes. Let's see how far I can get. Okay, I will be presenting the results of a collective project that I conducted with our colleague Liliana Rivera from el Colegio de Mexico, and Alberto Hernandez from Colegio also participated in it. Well, okay. As probably you all know, the relation between migration, international migration, and religion has been of interest since at least the second half of last century, and there are a lot of publications addressing this broad issue, but most of them are analyzing how international migration produces religious pluralism or diversity, mainly in cities of arrival, in host societies. But we have less information about how it relates with religious diversification in migrants' hometowns. So, with this project, Mudar de Credo en Contextos de Movilidad, we try to find out, for the Mexican case, if we can find a relation between international migration and religious diversification, or more generally, religious change. I will explain how are we defining religious change. Then the idea was to work with mixed methods, and we hold that the relationship between international migration and religious change can be analyzed from localities of origin as a strategic site of observation. Then we choose to see what was happening in localities with high rates of migration intensity, and see the implications of this mobility on religious fields. Okay, how did we decide where will we be focusing our study? Well, of course, we decided to focus on migrant sending areas where it would be possible to identify at the same time, religious changes in religious affiliation. Religious affiliation in Mexico should be understood first as a decline of Catholicism, and then in a second level, we try to identify who are the non-Catholics in Mexico. And then we try to focus on determining how such changes would be associated with international migration, or conversely, because by internal or regional factors. It's really migration, international migration, explaining why in some sending localities non-Catholic churches are growing. Well, then first we turn to census data on religion to identify those areas where the decline of Catholicism was higher, and try to find if there was a relation with migratory intensity rates. And what we found was that, well, we can identify three main regions. First, the traditional area of migration, where you can find high rates of migration intensity, but also low religious diversification. So there where you can find the largest tradition of migration, you won't find much diversification. Then second, there are some regions where you can find at the same time significant religious diversification and high rates of migration, but in those areas like Chiapas, for example, religious change comes before the intensification of migration. So you cannot explain this religious change through migration. And then third, we found some very small specific areas where religious diversification and migratory intensification have coexisted, then that were happening at the same time. Those are mainly the state of Morelos and some municipalities of Oaxaca and Veracruz. I only included Oaxaca there because that was for the 2010, not 2000 census, but for the 2010, we will also find Veracruz, some municipalities of Veracruz. This is just to show exactly the same that I've just said. You can see here that the states that are to the right are those with less Catholics, or with a more important percentage of non-Catholic population, like Chiapas. And to the left, you will find states like Michoacán, Guanajuato, Zacatecas, Jalisco, which are the most Catholic. And then to the top of the chart, you will see those states that are more intensely involved in migration, like, again, Michoacán, Guanajuato, Zacatecas. And in the lower part, you will find states like Chiapas that are not participating that much in migration. That's for the year 2000. So if you see there just some, well, in general, the more the states participate in migration, the more Catholic they are, and of course the opposite too. So if you see, Morelos is in the middle of the chart as one of the few states where you can find at the same time an important non-Catholic population and an important participation in international migration. So we choose to continue the second phase, focusing specifically on Morelos. There you can see the migratory intensity for municipalities from Morelos. Please try, well, I know you cannot read the names, but I will tell you. Okay. This is Tepalcingo, one of the highest rates of migratory intensity, and this is Zacualpa. As you can see, both have, well, they are located really close. They are part of more or less the same area, the same region, and they have similar characteristics concerning international migration. But if you compare it with the decline of Catholic population, you can see the huge difference. Tepalcingo is one of the municipalities where the decline of Catholicism is higher, and Zacualpan is the municipality where Catholicism is the highest, is over 90%. So, of course, we choose both municipalities to try to figure out why similar characteristics concerning historical traditions, being part of the same economical region, having more or less the same characteristics concerning international migration, would produce such differences concerning religious fields. Okay. Then for Tepalcingo and Zacualpan, we're trying to find out first if there is an effect of migration, international migration, on religious pluralization. It could be as a result of conversion processes or because of the circulation of persons affiliated to different denominations. I mean, non-Catholics migrating and concentrating in those specific areas. Second, if we could find some transnationalization of religious practices and the circulation of sociocultural remittances linked to religious beliefs, practices, and institutions. And third, let's see if we have time to go into that third one, the transformation of the perception of religious otherness. That's really important for us because we want to find out if being in contact with a more diverse context would change, perhaps not the person's adscription, but his attitude towards other religions. Okay. Then the first point, international migration and religious diversification. Then this one will be specifically addressed through the case of Tepalcingo. Through ethnographical approach, we identified every single non-Catholic temple or church from the municipality and tried to find its origin. Was it related with migration or not? I should say that in this municipality, Tepalcingo, there are specifically two localities, Ixtlilco el Grande, and I won't remember the name. I will say it. And the other one? Zacapalco, Zacapalco. That were concentrating almost all the non-Catholic population from the municipality. And most of the non-Catholic churches were established in those specific locations, Zacapalco and Ixtlilco el Grande. So we tried to find when those churches were founded and how was it related with migration or not. Well, we couldn't find a direct link with the formation of those religious communities and international migration. Most of those churches were, their origin was related with regional proselytizing efforts, mainly coming from Puebla. Secondly, once some of those churches were installed in the region, they were splitting and then giving origin to those other churches. And there were also related with migratory flows, but intra or interregional migratory flows. So it was not related with international migration. There was only one case, the Jehovah's Witnesses arrival. It was directly related with the return of two families, Jehovah's Witnesses families, that were not Jehovah's Witnesses before migrating. So only in that case, there is a really direct line between the arrival of other religions to the area. Okay, but I think this is important to point it out. Regardless of the time or reason of religious conversion, the trajectories of non-Catholic leaders shows that international migration is a key resource for the consolidation and expansion of new denominations. All the religious leaders of non-Catholic churches were migrating and were finding that migration was an important resource by economic reasons, but also by symbolic reasons to consolidate their new churches. Well, about the transnationalization of religious practices, there are two main cases that I would like to talk about. I will really go really fast through this. The first is the case of Zacualpan, then in the very Catholic municipality we were talking about. In this case, there is a patron saint festivity that is really the most important event in the year, during all the year at Zacualpan. And of course, there was an important participation of migrants in funding the festivity. Some of them were coming, not every year, but from time to time. But there was not really a transnational process, since migrants are very, very, how do you say that, dispersed? Dispersed. Thanks. They are very dispersed through the U.S. So you cannot find one Zacualpan community in the U.S. So they were participating, but mainly in an individual, isolated way, not as a Zacualpan community in the U.S. Another interesting thing to point out is that international migration, even if, as I told, has high rates, it's quite invisible. Migrants are not so visible. There is not a migrant mass that day. You cannot really see the presence of migrants during the festivity. And then third, migrants are somehow competing with very successful entrepreneurs that are not going to the US but to Cuautla or Mexico City, and that are those who give the most money for this party. So international migrants are not the star from this celebration. Well, the second case, well, that's what I just present. The second case I want to present is perhaps more interesting. It's for the case of Tepalcingo, where you can see a very transnational Seventh-day Adventist communities. And this is something I want to point out. In 1985, there was a group of mariachis, of Adventist mariachis, that traveled to California with religious workers visa. They were going to attend a congress, so they were invited by the Adventist church, and that's why they could first go to California. They visited several cities, then they came back to Tepalcingo, and just 2 years later, they went again, this time with another members of the church from Ixtlilco and Zacapalco, this time to Dallas. Again, most of them with religious workers visa, and some of them also as tourists. And after several trips like those, they consolidated this network, religious network, that became later on a migratory network. Even some members of the Seventh-day Adventists became the better known coyotes for the region. And of course, they were working not only with Seventh-day Adventists, but with anyone who would like to go specifically to Dallas. So the King's Messenger mariachi was a key player in this process of transnationalizing Christian music, but also on building this migratory network. That's the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tepalcingo. Okay, well, Again, I want to point out, migratory religious network did not necessarily have the effect of adding new members to the Adventist church. I mean, since you didn't need to be an Adventist to go through this migratory network, this was not necessarily a reason to become an Adventist. However, the Adventist community provided support to new migrants at their arrival. There were some economic niches, that's the way to say. Mainly in Texas, they were selling popsicles, driving through the streets with a refrigerated truck. So they say that even nowadays, if you run through this kind of popsicle sellers, and if he is a Mexican, you have very good chances to be in front of an Adventist from Morelos. Well, then, finally, the transformation of the perception of religious otherness. I will just go through 2 examples I think that are interesting. Perhaps there are many other things to say about it, but I hope I have time at least to present these 2. Okay. Then the first is the case of Aurora, that we call the believing without belonging. Aurora traveled undocumented to the U.S. with her 2 young children. She was in a very, very precarious situation, so she had to look for help first at the Salvation Army hostel, then in a shelter run by the Methodist Church. Finally, she approached the Mormon community. I didn't put it there, but just before her return, she was sharing an apartment with some Pentecostal migrants. And each time she approached a new community looking for help, she also approached their religious experience. She also tried to learn about their way of being religious. So after many, many problems, this is really a very tragical story, she decided to return to Zacualpan. Okay, and then when she came back, she decided to go again to the Catholic parish, since she said, well, finally, she has never stopped being a Catholic. However, migratory experience had turned her into a unconventional kind of believer, and she didn't fit anymore in the Catholic parish. Mainly, she was very uncomfortable with other Catholic ladies of the community that thought that she didn't dress properly, she didn't speak properly, she didn't behave properly, especially with men. So finally she decided to remain a believer and identified herself as Catholic while shifting religious practice to the individual level. So she decided not to go anymore to the Catholic Church, but she continued to consider herself as a Catholic. So that's why we call this following deity believing without belonging. Well, his son, Donato, was following her, of course, during all those religious shelters. And when he came back, he decided that a Pentecostal evangelical church was the closest he could find to his way of believing, of being a believer and practicing religion. So at the beginning, he was very well received. He was very well integrated in this evangelical community. And he was very appreciated by the congregants. But later, he had a personal conflict with the pastor, nothing related with religion, but really a personal conflict. And he was forced to leave the congregation. So at present, Donato believes that due to his experience in the US, where he found out about various religions, he is now able to distinguish himself between the good and the bad in any religion. And then he decided that he can create his own form to believe and practice. So he is beginning a new church in Zacualpan. We think that we can identify this way of practicing as being a believer my own way. So, should I finish here? 30 seconds? Well, no, I just want to say I pointed out that Zacualpan and Tepalcingo were in the same area, but well, one was the most Catholic, and the other one was the less, one of the less Catholic municipalities from this area. And then, of course, we wanted to find out why was this happening. And of course, there is not one short, simple answer, but two reasons or areas of reasons that should be considered is first, for the case of Zacualpan, then the very Catholic municipality, the importance of the system of religious cargos, el sistema de cargos, is linked to the organization of the ejido form of work, which remains relevant locally. Then nowadays, if you want to have water for your agricultural, you should better be a member of this sistema de cargos. But there is another point that it's really important, and this is the subsistence of certain grassroots communities founded the present century, and under the influence of the liberation theology that was very important in Morelos with Méndez Arceo. That gives a very special sense or very special characteristic of this local Catholicism. Then it seems that this kind of work of Catholic priests linked to the theology of liberation is perhaps one of the reasons that explains that this particular municipality remains highly Catholic. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga.
We have a few minutes if you have comments or questions about Olga's presentation. Gabriela.
Olga, thank you very much for such interesting presentation. I wonder, could you explain briefly what is happening in Chiapas for such a diverse religious movement? What is going on there?
Well, the first thing I should say is that it's absolutely not related with migration. It's definitely an endogenous process that might be related on what is happening with Guatemala, but as part of the same region, not as a mobility process. I think that will be really long to explain, but this is another kind of development of religious diversity, which has been mainly associated with ethnicity, with indigenous affiliation or identification, and that has also been associated with precarity. So this is more or less the same process that you can find in some areas of Mexico City, and those are the same kind of churches. Those are mainly Pentecostal churches. No. Actually, the muerteros, the devotees of La Santa Muerte, are mainly Catholic. So perhaps this particular way of being, this particular way of practicing is not very Catholic, but they are Catholics.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had the reverse, maybe. These could have been outliers, but maybe groups of migrants from Mexico who went to the U.S. who maybe converted to a U.S.-based religion that might not exist in Mexico, and they were starting little by little to bring something new back.
Well, actually, we were looking for them. We were trying to find them. We supposed, but it happened not to be true, we supposed that most non-Catholic churches had that kind of origin. One Catholic person going to, I don't know, Dallas or somewhere else, having a conversion process during their migratory experience, and then coming back to found a church and convert others. But we didn't find it. Even if we carefully chose the municipality of study, well, we thought that there at the Tepalcinco, we had very good chances to find those kind of processes, and we didn't. So we know those cases exist, like in the case of the family Jehovah's Witnesses that I mentioned, but they are really a few. So you cannot say that international migration is the origin of the religious diversity in Mexico. This is much more an endogenous process that is, international migration provides resources, both symbolic and economic, but you cannot know on which direction this will act in a specific religious field. It can reinforce and revitalize Catholicism, or on the other way, it can also reinforce and help to consolidate non-Catholic churches.
Well, I have a question regarding the mariachi members who got the religious visa. So I suppose that if they got the religious visa, that because they were supposed to work as pastors, or
yes.
Oh, so
yes. Well, yes. The story is a little bit more complicated because some of them were pastors, and then they were invited to this congregation. But in other cases, they got visas to study to become pastors in Dallas. So in both cases, those were legal visas, and they were honestly going there because they wanted to have this religious formation. It was not a pretext to have a visa. They really seriously wanted to go there because of religious reasons. Then it became a migratory network, but at the beginning they were seriously, honestly wanted to go there because of religious reasons.
very interesting. Okay, so unfortunately we don't have more time for this because we have the final presentation by Professor Luis Escala, and please, Luis, and so I won't be able to set any limits because I didn't realize that I took more than 30 minutes. I really apologize. So, Luis, you can speak as long as you want. So.
Oh, yes. Thank you. After 2 days of warning us, you got 20 minutes and that's it. Okay. Well.
Okay, sorry. So the presentation by Professor Luis Escala, who is the director of the Cultural Studies Department here at COLEF, is titled Indigenous Migrant Communities and Cultural Spaces Between Mexico and the United States, the Guelaguetza Festivals in California. Thanks, Luis.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Rafael Alarcón and Roger Waldinger for their kind invitation to participate in this seminar. Well, as I just mentioned, Rafael was warning us that, well, we had 20 minutes and that's it. And the only way I can make it, the 20-minute time limit is if I read most of my script, so please be patient on that. Now, the main purpose of my presentation is to give you a tight overview on a research project that we finished last year. And when I say we, it's my colleague and friend, Gaspar Rivera Salgado, at the UCLA Labor Research Center, and myself. This project focused on indigenous Mexican migrant communities and festivals in California. At the same time, with this overview, I want to give you a hint of what we do at the Department of Cultural Studies here at El COLEF in regards to the study of migration. Keep in mind that in addition to our graduate programs, we also have 6 different research departments here at El COLEF on different fields, on social sciences, but with a number of topics that cut across most of them. One of these topics is, of course, migration studies, and particularly the study of Mexican migrants in the United States. Our project focused on a specific cultural event, the Guelaguetza Festival, which has been occurring for more than a couple of decades in several locations in the United States, but mostly in the state of California. And it's carried out by a specific group of Mexican migrants in that state. Migrants from the state of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. Our interest comes in part from our previous work on Mexican immigrant hometowns associations in California. In fact, we had observed the significance of cultural preservation among some Oaxacan migrant groups, and the extent and meaningfulness of this particular festival among these migrants definitely grasped our attention. So we decided to launch our research project in 2013, supported by a grant from the UC Mexus Fund. Now, let me give you some background on this festival. The original festival takes place in the city of Oaxaca, the state's capital. Its roots can be traced back to the end of the 19th century, where a celebration of indigenous cultures, namely through music and dances from the 7 different cultural regions of that state, took place on a yearly basis. During the first half of the 20th century, these celebrations went through several transformations. And then, on 1951, and from 1951 on, the festival finally adopted its current features, including its name. The term Guelaguetza comes from the Zapotec language, which is one of the 17 indigenous groups in the state of Oaxaca, and it refers to a sense of reciprocity that is expected among the members of that community. And the official version of this festival, with the state's government approval, of course, portrayed music and dances from all the 7 regions of that state with the aim of conveying a sense of harmony between them, as well as an emblematic and colorful mosaic of the state of Oaxaca, provided they didn't portray the wrong image of the state. For example, images of poverty, images of backwardness were systematically left out. While Oaxacans had been migrating within Mexico for decades, during the 1980s, there was a massive emigration of Oaxacans to several points of destination in the US, mostly to the West Coast, particularly to the state of California, especially in 2 labor niches, agriculture and services. This migration of Oaxacans is a significant change in the patterns of Mexican migration to the US for at least 2 reasons. First, because they come from southern Mexico, not from the central western region, the traditional source of Mexican migration. And here, for the sake of this presentation, let's keep in mind that in this image, we're presenting it as a straightforward migration from one point to the other, while in fact, it was a 1-step or even a 2-step migration within Mexico before moving to the US. And the second reason why this is important is that these migrants are mostly indigenous, not white, not mestizo, like the Mexican migrants from the traditional region. While there's no hard data on their number, according to the US Census estimates, there were at the beginning of this century close to 500,000 of what they call Hispanic American Indians, predominantly of Mexican origin, mostly from Oaxaca. And by far, as I just pointed out, the bulk of this population is in the state of California. And with these migrants came their culture too, including celebrations like the Guelaguetza festivals. But probably you may wonder, okay, these changes in Mexican migration patterns might be interesting. But why should we pay any attention to something like these celebrations in a migrant community? Well, we found out quite soon that we were in very good company regarding our interest in documenting and examining this particular kind of events. For example, Amitai Etzioni, a very well-known sociologist, pointed out in a book on holidays and celebrations the relevance of paying attention to these events in social sciences because of the meanings they aim to communicate and the ways in which they are performed. In a similar vein, David Proctor, a colleague of Etzioni, concluded that despite the possible differences and tensions within a community, and we may say within a migrant community, festivals are special events that deserve scholar attention because of what they involve, namely the dramatization of communal ideals and collective identities. Now, going back to our project on this festival. As a result of this migration process that I just mentioned, several Oaxacan migrant communities gradually emerged in an extensive array of towns and cities in California, and with them, the eventual rise of these celebrations. For the purposes of our research, we selected the three oldest, largest, and most important Guelaguetza festivals in California, 3 out of 12 that actually take place in that state. And that's, by the way, as the title of this seminar suggests, one of the great advantages of having a research center in a place like Tijuana give to us, the ones that are interested in migration. The first festival that we selected is the one that takes place in the city of Los Angeles, ever since 1987. The second one is the one that takes place pretty close to us, in the city of San Marcos in San Diego County, ever since 1994. And the third one is the one that takes place in the city of Fresno in Central California, ever since 1999. Well, these festivals are organized by Oaxacan migrant associations and coalitions focused on cultural preservation, which imply carrying out fundraising activities throughout the year. One of the things we were interested in was to document and examine these actions towards cultural preservation among these groups. That is, the ways in which this festival was recreated, which meant the efforts made by these groups and communities to stick to the original celebration. These festivals are carried out in public spaces with massive attendance that ranges between 3,000 and 5,000 people throughout the day. They bring together an array of Oaxacan music bands, Oaxacan dance groups, Oaxacan food vendors and Oaxacan restaurants, and even Oaxacan artisans. This combination conveys a sense of cultural recreation among these migrants, and certainly lies in a sense of authenticity of these cultural practices. But some of our most important findings, or at least that's what we think they are important, had to do with those aspects that made this festival different to the original one. This is important precisely because it illustrates the significant impact of migration in these individuals and their cultural practices. This means it is not only a matter of cultural recreation, but the re-signification of this event. For example, one of these aspects refers to the attendance of key political figures, not only from the state of Oaxaca, which is merit enough for these migrant associations, the fact that they can bring a representative of Oaxaca's government to California, but also the presence, the attendance of key political figures from their host societies. See, for example, in this slide, the presence of Los Angeles Mayor, Mr. Eric Garcetti, to the Guelaguetza Festival in that city in 2013. This attendance, according to us, was not merely ornamental or protocolary. He is interacting with the participants, and during the festival's inauguration, he stated in perfect Spanish not only the importance of Mexican migrants' contributions to the Los Angeles society and economy, but of Oaxacan migrants' contributions to the Los Angeles society. And that to us is, in a way, remarkable for reasons that we'll explore later, I hope. In fact, this is something that we want to point out in the conclusions of this presentation, 2 slides ahead, don't worry. But I guess it illustrates one of the ways in which the festival starts to look different to the original and the importance of it. But if we look closer, there are other aspects, particularly cultural components, that reveal the singularity of this festival. If you remember the excerpts we presented before, quoting scholars like Etzioni and Proctor, you'll remember an element they emphasize on the relevance of cultural events like festivals, which is the importance of dramatic elements like narratives, to effectively communicate their meanings or community ideals. In this sense, we identified at least 3 intertwined narratives in this festival, conveyed through different references and symbols. One was the identification of participants as Oaxacans, but also as indigenous and also as migrants, in terms that take distance from the sense of harmony portrayed in the original festival, and identifying themselves as part of the exploited and oppressed in the US. The forging of this story or narrative constitutes the resulting frame that provides new meanings to the components of this festival. And all these components are pivotal in the making and consolidation of a collective identity among migrant communities like this one. Now, let me recap by pointing out 3 very, very basic conclusions. First, the culture matters, and culture matters in migration studies. This is somewhat obvious, but more than once, culture keeps being reduced to a sort of residual category in the study of migration, vis-a-vis other more robust concepts like labor markets and politics. Of course, I am not saying that labor markets and politics are not important, but rather what I want to do here is to emphasize the importance of culture in the dynamics of migrant communities and their study. However, considered, the importance of culture is more evident when we are able to show its connections with other fields of society. The study of cultural celebrations like the Guelaguetza festivals among Oaxacan migrants in California suggests at least, not the only one, but at least one of these connections. The linkages between these cultural events and a crucial concept in migration studies like social capital. That is, the ways in which these events like the Guelaguetza Festival, facilitate the bridging and bonding aspects of this crucial component for migrant communities. And third, finally, something similar can be said on the linkages between these cultural events and political capital. Let's remember the slides in which Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti attends this festival, which opens up the possibilities of forging political ties between this migrant community and elected officials. In fact, this relationship has been cultivated by the regional organization of Oaxaca, the migrant association in charge of staging this festival in Los Angeles, resulting in the expansion of its agenda and the expansion of its interests with the support of the Angelino political authorities. Not bad for a migrant organization that one of the first ways to define itself is by saying we are not political, we are not a political organization. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, which I'm aware that there's a number of gaps and oversimplifications in it, hopefully this will give you an idea not only of what I've been doing during the last couple of years, which is the less important, but mostly of what we do at the Department of Cultural Studies here at El Colef in regards to the examination of migration and culture. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luis, for this very, very interesting presentation. Now we have 10 minutes for questions, comments, criticisms.
I wonder if migrants were not afraid of authorities, because before we saw with Rafael that removals were very intensive or in the last years, yeah, and I see that they are congregated in those festivals, and do you find something about fear?
Yes.
Sure. The other, when you were maybe 2 or 3 slides back, you were talking about the importance, you were referring to Etzioni and talking about the ways in which these types of festivals create cultural cohesion. But the picture was, it seemed to me, was that of people pledging allegiance to the American flag. And I'm wondering why you didn't, I mean, am I wrong? Or how do you interpret the significance of what was being visualized in that frame?
Any other questions to add to the, please, Gabriela.
Luis, during the dramatization inside the Guelaguetza, do they follow the guidelines given by the Oaxacan state government, or you mentioned that there are some dramatization regarding the process of migration and how they are received in Los Angeles, in this case, in particular case that you mentioned. But are these dramatization include anything like how they were displaced from their lands, or what are the reasons for what they abandoned their lands? Are there anything such of topics included? Thank you.
Okay, now you have enough questions.
Well, thank you very much. In regards to migrants, especially Oaxacan migrants and authorities, no, in fact, we were somewhat puzzled by that fact, the fact that they were not afraid at all by the presence, or they were not intimidated at all by the presence of the San Diego Police Department or the LAPD at these events. I guess that it had to do with the fact that we are talking about cities in which, at the very least, in this kind of public gatherings, there's a sort of truce. There's a sort of truce. Or at the very least, I'm going to talk to you about our fieldwork experience. We never cope with any situation in which any of the attendants or any of the participants on the stage were in any way threatened or manifest any sort of intimidation by the presence of the police. On the contrary, On the contrary, more than once they pointed out it's a very good thing that we have security here. You know, because if we have 5,000 people in here, well, you never know. It's a good thing, yeah. So in that sense, yeah, I guess that we can explain that by that. Of course, it goes beyond the scope of our research project, but we'd love to compare this with what happens, for example, near the East Coast. Some of these Guelaguetza festivals taking place in places like Chicago. What's going on in there, or at other states, whether this perception is the same, is shared or not. In regards to cultural cohesion and the U.S. flag, well, on both sides of the stages, the American as well as the Mexican flag, and they pay allegiance to both flags. I think that's in a way expected as part of the protocolary ritual that you have to perform in there. Both national anthems are performed. So in a way, well, I think that's kind of the way of doing it. Of course, yeah, probably we need to explore some more. And yeah, right now we have like a ton of transcribed interviews that we are still in the process of analyzing and examining and trying to make the right connections here. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and in the image we presented, yeah, probably the most visible flag is the American flag, but on the other side you have the Mexican flag. And here we have two flags, two anthems. So in a way, I think it's nice because in that picture you have the political authorities of both Oaxaca and the city of Los Angeles, for example, or the ones that takes place in Fresno and San Diego. You're going to have a political representative of the same city. That tells us something on, well, there's at the very least a willing to be there, that we think it's important. And also the fact that, of course, we are trying not to be naive here. We want to think that people like Eric Garcetti, well, he's a major, but he's a political animal. He is looking for political validation from these new communities, which, by the way, most of them nowadays, or at least a significant number of them nowadays, can vote. So you see, in that sense, it's not. I mean, there's a reason for it. Finally, in regards to the dramatization of Guelaguetzas, or the Guelaguetza Festival, I don't know if I got it right. What I pointed out is that the dramatization has to do with the community ideals, and certainly this somewhat kind of a Marxist narrative that they construct certainly involves more than once a criticism towards the Mexican government in general. That's the reason why we're here, because we're poor because of, but I mean, the references to the Mexican government are not that present. I think that they are more present to, not necessarily American government, but there are more mentions to, for example, American policies in regards to migrant populations, for example. And say, well, once again, keep in mind that we have these policies, we have a number of politicians who are promoting this or that initiative. Let's keep this in mind because we as migrants, blah, 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 blah. So in that sense, yeah, more than once you can find some criticism toward the Oaxaca government or even the federal government in Mexico, but I think it prevails the former.
Roger, you had a comment, right? You wanted to say something?
That we are extremely hungry.
Well, maybe take it. Yes, please. Can you use that mic?
Yeah, sure. That was a really wonderful presentation. Thank you. I'm curious about language. And I noticed that you mentioned that Garcetti was speaking in Spanish. And Guelaguetza, as you presented, distinguishes itself culturally from the rest of Mexico in dance and song. Are there other languages? Like, is there Mixtec? And do you ever see a future where Garcetti will address the crowd in Mixtec as opposed to Spanish?
Well, it's not unlikely. And I tell you what, one of the things that puts a very significant difference between the festivals in California and the original one in the city of Oaxaca is that, for example, some of the announcements of each one of the musical numbers was, not in every case, but in an important number of them, was made in 3 languages, in Spanish, in English, and in Zapotec or in Mixtec. And that is done by some of the young participants in these dance groups, which in a way can explain that. I mean, the fact that this is a second generation that can handle 3 different languages, for example. And yeah, but I guess that in a way, I mean, maybe if I ever have the chance have an encounter with Mr. Eric Garcetti, maybe I should suggest something like that, because this is politically a good reason to go for this kind of population. And of course, I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, but this looks wonderful on stage.
Yes.
I just had 2 things on my mind. The first was, did you feel like there was a sense of healthy competition amongst like some of the other California groups on Marcos, Fresno, whatever you were looking at, whether or not they talked about ours was the biggest or the most attended or we had the most traditional one? And then the other thing I was thinking about, whether or not, I guess in terms of material culture, the arts and crafts and the textiles, whether those were imported from Oaxaca or were those created by artisans who were immigrants now, and they were based in those cities, and so now there's maybe a sense of pride that the Oaxaca community is large enough that they can actually get these materials and make them there and not have to import them.
Okay. Well, in regards to the first question on a healthy competition, not necessarily. We didn't find a kind of real competition. I mean, there's perfect awareness that each one of these delegates that we picked for our research project is organized by a different Oaxacan migrant association, which in a way was wonderful for us because that gave us a chance to compare different groups, different migrant associations, and in a way the different strategies they display to stage each one of these events, which by the way are very, very complex. And let's keep in mind that these are voluntary groups. These are voluntary groups. I mean, remember what I mentioned, that they have to fundraise throughout the entire year in order to get enough funds to put this on stage. So, no, on the contrary, what we found that there were some incipient attempts to coordinate between them in California in order to come up with a more planned or sharing resources or something like that. But at this point, it's still in an incipient stage because there's nothing very, very concrete in that direction. In regards to arts and crafts, you have both. You have imported crafts from the state of Oaxaca, but also you have imported artisans. You have artisans that come to these Guelaguetza festivals with the intention of precisely have this, how do you say, talleres? Workshops. I knew it. I was testing you. Okay. You have these wonderful workshops in which these artisans are going to come up with something, and they are going to have a limited audience, but this is like part of the festival, which make it like even more memorable in that sense.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say, I think there's a tremendous connection between the last 2 speakers, and not only is this cultural tradition, but also religious traditions. I worked a lot of years in the States where the local mayor, when he would know the Hispanic population was substantial, would call you up the day before Guadalupe to say, I'd like to come to the Guadalupe Mass. You know, so they're well aware of political power. So I think you could do some crossover studies, but that's something for both.
Final question, yes, please.
You mentioned earlier that these are voluntary organizations that have to spend a lot of time raising funds for these festivals. But I was wondering how commodified these festivals become, especially over time. What I have in mind is that like the Korean migrant festivals or the Japanese Brazilian festivals in Japan, and they have all these festivals, and they start out as a site for express in their religious, their community cohesions, and it's a pretty much non-commercial activities. And over time, they start attracting local populations and big food stalls, and people come and they want to see all these cultural productions, and they become commercialized, highly commercialized, commodified sites. And then in the process, they become sort of co-opted into the mainstream society as a generic global capitalist productions. And then also just the commodification of so-called ethnic migrant authentic culture becomes so highly commodified. So I was wondering if something similar is happening in these Oaxacan cultural ethnic festivals in all these different sites in the United States as well?
Well, thank you. Yeah, what we were able to observe throughout our research project was that, there was a kind of a struggle between these voluntary migrant associations and some ethnic entrepreneurs, especially Oaxacan entrepreneurs, who were trying to come up with a much more commercialized version of the same festival. So a sort of commercial Guelaguetza festival. And of course, charging the entrance in a more, in a more expensive manner. I mean, usually these festivals, they cost in between $5 to $10 the entrance, and well, and what we were able to observe and document was the fact that there was this struggle, and there was an attempt precisely to coordinate with other Oaxacan migrant associations in the state of California, precisely to stop the advancement of these entrepreneurial attempts. So in a way, what we were witnessing was all this fascinating discussion on authenticity, on cultural recreation as such. This is something that, of course, we pointed out in the presentation, but as we pointed out too, well, it turns out that some of the most significant findings have to do with things that put the different on a different path in regards to the authentic, original festival in the city of Oaxaca. But at this point, at the very least, it seems to be that the migrant voluntary organizations of Oaxacan migrants were the ones who are winning this struggle. Why? Because the entrepreneurs, in a way, were defeated. They couldn't come up with real commercial events for this kind of festival. So in a way, that was good news for the other side of the struggle. But at the end, I think that this discussion on whether the trend is to be commodified or not, well, I guess I want to think of it as something that is contingent. We don't know what's going to happen. But at the very least, at this point, the organization of the whole festival lies in, as I pointed out, this sense of let's try to be authentic. Let's recover let's try to recreate the festival as it happens in the city of Oaxaca, as it happens in the different regions of Oaxaca. That's going to be present, and that's significant. I mean, despite the fact that I emphasize the things that make this festival in California different, the issue of cultural recreation is not a small issue. On the contrary, I think this is very important, because in a way, this is a source of meaning that moves people in one direction or in other. And for us, well, that's significant, and that's something that we have not only to document, but try to make sense of it.
Thank you very much. So this is the end of our seminar, and I would like to leave the final word to Professor Waldinger.
Okay, well, all that I can say is thank you so much to Rafael and to all of the presenters for a series of fascinating and deeply insightful talks. And I look forward to another set of exchanges at some point in the reasonably near future. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you very much.